Get ready for the wildest, most heart-stopping moment of this entire adventure. Picture our unsuspecting engineer barreling headlong into a high-tech courtyard, alien guardian at his side, while powerful corporate henchmen close in from every direction. Energy blasts are flying, strange devices threaten to tear open portals to who knows where, and all seems lost until a flash of cosmic light changes everything. That pivotal sequence is the heartbeat of this story, a whirlwind of courage, risk, and a bond that transcends mortal limits. If you're curious how our heroes survive, and whether they manage to save more than just themselves, stick around for the entire tale. You'll find epic confrontations, unexpected alliances, and maybe even a touch of interstellar romance. And before you dive in, make sure to subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss more exciting stories just like this one. A volley of thunder rippled across the sky, casting vivid flashes of violet and pink through thick, roiling storm clouds. Rain drummed against the tinted window of a cramped downtown apartment as Marcus Fowler hovered his thumb over a large, blinking accept button on his phone. The night was alive with a kaleidoscope of colors. Neon signs on adjacent rooftops bled into one another, creating a surreal ambiance that only heightened Marcus's sense of impending doom. A battered manila envelope lay on his cluttered desk, featuring an embossed logo of Meridian Innovations, his former employer, and a single damning line, termination notice. He was 31, a dedicated mechanical engineer with a clean record, yet he had been unceremoniously cast aside under the guise of corporate downsizing. In just one day, all the carefully organized structures of his life had collapsed like a house of cards, leaving him desolate and desperate. His gaze flicked between that humiliating envelope and the app's luminescent prompt. A friend from college, whose name Marcus could hardly recall, had mentioned this mysterious Catalyst app during a late-night phone call. The friend had claimed it offered unimaginable opportunities, loans, partnerships, scholarships, even specialized help that defied normal understanding. Marcus had been skeptical, but with severance checks delayed and rent looming, curiosity triumphed over caution. The app's icon displayed a stylized, swirling galaxy glowing faintly, beckoning him to accept some contract. The contract's text, if one scrolled, seemed endless and replete with archaic clauses in tiny script. He had tried to read it earlier, but got lost in pages of bizarre stipulations about cosmic guardianship and dimensional synergy. None of it seemed real. "How much worse can it get?" he murmured, wiping raindrops from his brow. Maybe it was the slick reflection of neon off his phone's screen, or the rumble of thunder that resonated in his chest, but at that moment, reality felt malleable. He exhaled a shaky breath, tapped accept, and waited. A swirl of text flitted across the screen, indecipherable lines referencing astral binding, universal codes, and high-level confidentiality. Annoyed and suspicious, Marcus tried to scroll back up, but a sudden pain surged in his temple. He winced, nearly dropping the device, which now prompted him for a signature. "This is insane," he muttered under his breath, but with a kind of numb resignation, he scrawled his electronic signature. Everything went dark. The phone's screen died as though it had short-circuited under the weight of the contract's final confirmation. Marcus frowned, pressing the power button, then trying a forced restart. Nothing worked. He was still fiddling with the battery casing when a deafening series of knocks rattled his apartment door. It was so loud and urgent that he half expected the wood to splinter. Shocked, he glanced through the peephole into the dimly lit corridor. Nothing. Another crack of thunder, followed by a second barrage of pounding, stronger this time. Hard in his throat, Marcus opened the door a few inches. That was when he saw her. Tall, lithe, clad in a sleek black bodysuit that seemed to devour the hallway's meager light. She was radiant in a singularly uncanny way. Her skin was a deep cerulean color, shimmering under the flickering overhead bulb. Her pale lavender hair cascaded around her shoulders, and her eyes, brilliant gold, locked onto his in an instant. A knowing smile curved across her full lips as she spoke, voice resonant with both confidence and mystery. "Good evening, Master Marcus Fowler," she said. "I am Zara, your sworn guardian and servant." Marcus staggered backward. mind reeling at the figure stepping gracefully into his living room. The lock snapped shut behind her with a subtle motion of her hand. If her abrupt appearance wasn't bizarre enough, her choice of words certainly was. "Master Marcus Fowler," he repeated faintly, hardly able to wrap his head around the concept. "Zara? Who are you?" With a courteous bow that defied the chaos of the situation, she said, "I am bound to you by the contract you just signed. You required assistance. I arrived." Her tone was matter-of-fact, as though explaining a well-established protocol. But Marcus could sense an undercurrent of amusement in her gilded eyes. He tried to piece things together logically. This had to be some elaborate trick. Perhaps Meridian Innovations was pulling a twisted joke, or he had unwittingly subscribed to a shady new gig service app that dispatched costume performers. Yet, as Zara straightened, the overhead light revealed a glowing geometric pattern etched on her bodysuit, a pattern that shifted colors, seemingly reacting to her bodily rhythms. You're not even human," he stammered. She lifted a cobalt-colored hand, and a faint orb of crackling energy flickered into existence above her palm. The swirl of luminescent air made the hairs on his arms stand up. "Does that answer your question?" she asked gently. Marcus stared, entirely stunned. That was no projector, no run-of-the-mill special effect. He felt the air in the room change, ionizing around them. Instinctively, his engineering brain kicked into gear, analyzing the crackling energy in front of him. It didn't match any conventional phenomenon he knew. It was a phenomenon that was, well, not of this world. Before he could articulate another doubt, his phone abruptly lit up on the coffee table, buzzing with incoming messages. Marcus blinked. The device had been utterly dead mere moments ago. He snatched it up, scanning cryptic notifications from unknown numbers. The messages repeated the same ominous demand. Contract recognized, unauthorized activation. Surrender the artifact. The text became progressively more threatening, referencing severe legal action, bodily harm, and something about corporate property retrieval. Marcus's skin prickled with dread. Zara's expression darkened. "They've already located us." She glided to the window, her boots making no sound on the worn carpet. Outside, the storm raged harder, but through the water-streaked glass, he discerned dark vans screeching to a stop at the curb. Their tinted windows and unmarked plates screamed private security, or worse. The front doors flew open, and he saw men in tactical gear file out, assault rifles in hand. "They're from Zoran Corporation," Zara said curtly. "Their intelligence division has been seeking the contract bearer for decades. They believe it's a piece of advanced hardware. They don't grasp the real power behind it." "But why me? Why are they here?" Marcus asked, voice trembling. She turned toward him with a gentle but urgent gaze. "Because you inadvertently became a key player in something colossal. A contract that binds ancient forces to mortal hosts. Now they want to acquire or terminate that power before it's fully realized in you. We have to leave. Immediately." The hallway outside exploded with noise as footsteps thundered up the stairs. Marcus heard someone shout commands just beyond his door. Desperation overcame him. "Leave, but I have nowhere to—" "No time for explanations," Zara cut in, her bodysuit shifting to form gleaming protective plates around her forearms and shoulders. "Stay behind me if you want to live." An explosive crash rocked the apartment as the door hinges tore off, the flimsy wood slamming to the floor. Smoke grenades rolled across the threshold, spewing thick clouds that stung Marcus's eyes. He coughed and squinted through the haze, trying to make out the figures in full tactical gear fanning into his living room. Their leader, a lean man in a slick corporate suit, leveled a small handheld device at Zara. "Mr. Fowler," the man said in an eerily calm voice, "we are with Zorson Corporation's Asset Recovery Division. Hand over the contract artifact, and we can resolve this peacefully." Marcus pressed himself behind Zara. She stood with preternatural confidence, arms raised in a defensive stance. Her sleek armor plating glinted whenever lightning flashed outside. "He's under my protection," Zara declared, her voice resonating with an unnatural timbre that reverberated in Marcus's chest. "Back away, or I will be forced to respond." The man's sneer twisted into a grin that lacked any warmth. So be it. He flicked a switch on the device, and a sonic pulse reverberated through the room. For a split second, Marcus felt nauseous, as though his insides were vibrating. Zara winced, her posture faltering, but she recovered quickly. She gestured toward the swirling air around them, and an energy field enveloped them both. Bullets erupted from the mercenaries' rifles, but they ricocheted off Zara's protective barrier, hitting lamps and walls instead. Sparks flew, glass shattered. Marcus's heart hammered so loudly that it drowned out the chaos. With fluid grace, Zara lunged forward. The field around her seemed to shift, condensing into an offensive charge. She spun, delivering a roundhouse kick that sent one gunman crashing into the hallway. Another mercenary attempted to flank her. Zara countered with an upward burst of energy that disarmed him instantly. The snap crackle of power was near deafening. Despite the lethal skill she displayed, she took care not to kill. Each blow incapacitated the attackers, but left them alive, moaning in pain. "Marcus, I need you to focus," Zara shouted as she vaulted over a toppled bookshelf, deflecting more gunfire. "Part of the contract's magic draws on your intent, your emotional state. If you panic, I can't fully protect you." Her words hammered at the edges of his stunned consciousness. Marcus forced himself to concentrate on something, anything, besides the fear gnawing at him. He pictured a circuit board's flow of electricity, the neat lines of conduction. The sensation of synergy swelled in his chest, blossoming outward. Almost instantly, Zara's energy intensified, wreathing her body in a brighter glow. She pivoted, unleashing a wave of force that swept the last two mercenaries off their feet. The corporate leader cursed under his breath, barking orders into a headset. More footsteps pounded in the corridor. Zara flashed Marcus a tight smile. "We have to make a run for it. They'll just keep sending reinforcements. I can only hold them off so long." He gulped, adrenaline surging. "There's a stairwell at the end of the hall and a fire escape outside the third-floor window." "Lead the way," Zara commanded, seizing his wrist in a firm but reassuring grip. Together they barreled through the swirling smoke. The frantic chase had only just begun. They bolted into the corridor, stepping over unconscious mercenaries, shards of splintered wood, and bullet casings that gleamed under the emergency exit lights. Sirens wailed outside as the building's alarm system finally caught up with the chaos. Lightning flared through a high window at the far end of the hallway, revealing a tangle of steel scaffolding. The old fire escape. Marcus felt Zara's steady grip, a bastion of calm in the middle of unrelenting pandemonium. "Got to warn you," he gasped. "It's probably rusted halfway to oblivion." Zara's answering grin was fierce. "Trust me to handle the structural issues." They reached the tall window, and Zara used a blade-like projection of her armor to shatter the glass. Rain immediately whipped in, plastering Marcus's hair to his forehead and leaving his clothes heavy with moisture. Gunmen rounded the corner behind them, opening fire. Zara thrust her hand backward, unleashing a burst of energy that short-circuited the ceiling lights and forced the mercenaries to dive for cover. "Go!" she yelled, shoving Marcus onto the narrow platform outside. Cold wind lashed at his face. Clinging to the rickety railing, he glanced down, a straight drop of 20 floors to the rain-slick street below. Red and blue lights spun in the distance, marking approaching patrols. Police or private security, he couldn't tell which. Heart in his throat, he started descending, one trembling step at a time. Zara followed, her vantage allowing her to watch for threats from above. A loud crack signaled that the old metal frame was giving way under their combined weight. Grimacing, Marcus tried to move faster. He recalled the workshop he used to rent, an abandoned auto garage on the outskirts of the city. Hardly anyone knew about it. It had been his secret tinkering hideout for years. "We need to get to the outskirts," he managed through gritted teeth as he lowered himself to the next landing. "I have a place, a safe place. Well, safer than here." "Coordinates," Zara urged, scanning the cityscape for vantage points. "I can get us there, but we may have to do something drastic." She didn't elaborate, and Marcus wasn't sure he wanted her to. They finally reached a lower platform. Above, the corporate attackers found the shattered window. Shouts echoed down the metal steps. With no time to lose, Zara grabbed him around the waist. Without warning, she launched them both outward. Marcus let out a strangled scream, arms flailing as they hurtled into open air. But Zera's armor reconfigured mid-leap, forming translucent wings that caught the rain-lashed wind. They soared away from the building, leaving stunned pursuers behind. Every muscle in Marcus's body tensed. This defied all logic, but here he was, gliding over flickering street lamps and swirling storm drains, clutched in the arms of an otherworldly woman. Below them, the city's labyrinth of skyscrapers and monorail tracks seemed to merge into a single neon circuit board. "We can't keep flying around like this," he yelled against the howling wind. "I'll land near your workshop once we lose them," she shouted back. "That is, if you trust me." He blinked rain from his eyes. What choice did he have? That trust would have to be enough for now. They touched down on a deserted stretch of industrial highway, puddles splashing underfoot. At this hour, the factories stood silent, their looming smokestacks slicing the stormy sky. Lightning flashed repeatedly, painting everything in silver-laced shadows. Marcus guided Zera across a series of lock-gate gates and barbed wire fences until they reached a squat brick building with boarded-up windows. Faded lettering along one side read, "Fowler and Sons Automotive, Eastern 1974. Marcus's father had once run a modest repair shop here, which had been passed to Marcus after his passing. Unable to maintain the failing business, Marcus had turned it into a personal workshop for his side projects, innovations no one else cared to see. He found the hidden key in a busted drain pipe and let them inside. The interior smelled of engine oil, old rubber, and stale coffee. Flicking on an overhead light, Marcus revealed a cluttered workspace, metal tables strewn with prototypes, half-disassembled engines, and sketches pinned to corkboards. A homemade generator hummed quietly in the corner. Zera stepped in, her gaze sweeping across the equipment. "This is an impressive operation," she remarked. "You are clearly not just a corporate drone." Marcus tossed aside a pile of rags on a stool and slumped onto it, exhausted. His mind was still reeling from the flight, the firefight, and the surreal presence of Zera. He finally mustered the nerve to ask the question that had been gnawing at him. "I need to know right now what I've gotten into. This contract, you, everything." Her gaze softened. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "The short version, I'm from a civilization that discovered how to bind a guardian, someone like me, to a mortal host, granting that host extraordinary abilities. The contract you signed is an ancient artifact that allowed you to become my bearer. Our energies are now intertwined. Zoran Corporation interprets the artifact as a piece of technology they can reverse engineer, which is why they're so eager to seize it. And us." Marcus exhaled, fighting waves of disbelief. "So you're an alien warrior bound to me, right? And you called me master? That's not exactly my style." He wanted answers, but also felt uneasy about the power dynamic implied by the word. Zera inclined her head. "I understand your discomfort. Culturally, the term is meant to imply protectorate rather than a hierarchy of servitude. But for convenience, I've always used master or bearer. If you wish me to call you something else, I will comply. Understand, though, that my primary function is to safeguard you and amplify your latent abilities, as the contract demands." He ran a hand through his wet hair. "Okay, well, how do we sever the contract? Or can we?" A pained look crossed her face. "If you try to sever it prematurely, I would be cast back into nothingness. The cosmic energies sustaining me would unravel. That's not something I relish." Marcus took that in, mouth going dry. I don't want to kill you. I just can't believe any of this is real." He scanned his environment. Oil-stained floors, half-finished machinery, the torrential downpour pounding the roof. It struck him that, ironically, the most surreal thing in this entire scenario was that it actually made sense to him on some deeper gut level. Before Marcus could voice another question, a thunderous boom echoed outside. The sturdy walls of the workshop vibrated, and overhead fixtures rattled. Zera instantly tensed, the glowing lines on her bodysuit intensifying. "They must have tracked us. Zoran's forces move faster than I expected," she muttered, moving to a grimy window to peer out. Marcus joined her. At the far end of the block, arcs of spotlights cut through the haze of rain, highlighting a convoy of matte black SUVs. The first wave had arrived, and it looked like more were closing in behind them. "We have to move again," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "There's a back exit leading to an old storage yard. But once we're out, where do we go?" Zara turned to him, eyes fierce. "There's a place outside the city, a decommissioned communications tower in the mountains. It belonged to someone who once attempted to wield a contract but failed. I've used it as a safe house before." Marcus was about to ask how she knew such a location, but the front gate of the workshop clanged open, metal grating on concrete. Zoran operatives, armed with rifles, began fanning through the yard. Laser sights danced across the brick exterior, searching for signs of life. Marcus's pulse hammered. This building was no fortress, and any illusions of safety evaporated under the threat of heavy artillery. A voice bellowed through a megaphone. "Mr. Fowler, we know you're inside. We have a perimeter around the premises. Hand over the artifact and your so-called guardian. A refusal to comply is punishable under Corporate Code 715, and we are authorized to use lethal force." "Where do they get the legal authority to do this?" Marcus hissed, outraged. "Corporate Code 715? That is not part of any official city statute, right? Zoran owns the local security contracts and half the politicians," Zara said grimly. "Official or not, they act with near impunity. But legal niceties won't matter if they blast us into ashes." She hurried to the large workbench, scanning the tools. "We need a diversion. With your mechanical expertise and my energy manipulation, we might rig something to slow them down." Marcus jumped into action. He rummaged through a series of boxes, pulling out wires, a canister of compressed gas, and leftover circuit boards. His mind locked onto the problem. Create a device that would hamper visibility and maybe scramble electronics. If they could disable the SUVs, that would buy enough time to slip out. Within minutes, he'd fashioned a crude electromagnetic pulse emitter powered by an oversized battery pack. He'd never tested it on such a large scale, but desperation fueled his creativity. Zoran's voice echoed again from the yard. "This is your final warning." "Let's see if this works," Marcus whispered, hooking up a tangle of cables to the battery. At the same moment, Zara pressed a palm to the contraption, pouring a shimmering field of alien energy into it. The device sputtered, then glowed bright purple. They set it by the main door, and Marcus triggered the remote from behind a makeshift cover. A wave of crackling light burst forth, rolling across the yard like a thundercloud. SUVs flickered, their headlights dying. Operatives cursed as their earpieces failed. Zara gave Marcus a triumphant nod. "Run," she said, "now." They raced to the back exit, heartbeats in sync. Under the cloak of confusion caused by the pulse, they escaped through a rusted side gate. Lightning still flashed overhead, illuminating their path between abandoned factories. Their boots splashed through murky puddles as they kept low, heading for the deserted railway tracks that led out of the industrial district. The pounding of rain on corrugated rooftops nearly obscured the echo of gunshots and shouting behind them. But the glow of Zara's energy field lit the way, weaving in sync with Marcus's accelerating pulse. "We can't outrun them forever," Marcus gasped, trying to keep pace with Zara's fluid strides. "You said something about a communications tower in the mountains. Let's go there. Maybe I can power up my phone once we're safe. See if there's someone trustworthy left to contact." Zara nodded, scanning the deserted lots around them. "It's not far, but we'll need transportation. My armor can only fly us short distances before the energy drain becomes too great, especially in this weather." Marcus thought back to the rickety truck he kept stashed behind his workshop, an old pickup that only sometimes started. But returning for it meant diving straight into the enemy's net. They didn't have that luxury. "We might commandeer a vehicle," he suggested. "After that EMP, Zoran's rides might be down, but maybe they have backups or other forms of transit." She paused by a chain-link fence, placing a hand on the metal, and closed her eyes. Her lips parted in a whisper, though no sound emerged. The fence glowed for an instant, an eerie swirl of bluish sparks traveling across the links. Afterward, she nodded. "The area is crawling with more of them, but there's a decommissioned rail line that leads north. If we can reach an inbound cargo train, we might stow away. It's not elegant, but it's better than being cornered." Marcus flashed a half grin. Train hopping in the middle of a storm with an alien guardian by my side. Hardly the life I imagined. Your life changed the moment you signed that contract, Zara said softly, as if apologizing for the upheaval. I'm sorry you didn't have a choice. He squeezed her hand. The contact sent a spark of warmth through his arm, an echo of that bond she had described. Despite the terror of their situation, a part of him felt oddly connected. Let's get moving. They followed the fence line for a few blocks, eventually scaling it where it was bent and sagging. Beyond lay a disused freight yard, silent except for the pounding rain. Rusting tracks snaked off into the distance. In the corner of his eye, Marcus glimpsed the headlights of more vehicles combing parallel streets. The chase was still on. Carefully, they pressed forward, searching for a train that might be operational. At last, they spotted a slow-moving freight with its lights off, perhaps a night run or an unscheduled cargo transport. With no time to debate, they sprinted alongside it, searching for an open boxcar. Slipping in, they collapsed against the metal interior as the train picked up speed, bearing them away from the city's neon glow. In hushed darkness, with only the rhythmic clatter of tracks beneath them, Marcus asked, So, how does one accidentally sign a galactic contract? Zara let out a wry chuckle, brushing her lavender hair from her face. We'll discuss that and everything else once we're safe at the tower. Rest now, Marcus. You've earned it. He nodded, exhaustion tugging at his eyelids, though fear kept him from fully succumbing. Outside, the tempest raged on, but inside that old freight car, a fragile sense of possibility flickered to life. The freight train thundered steadily into the night, rolling deeper into the rural outskirts. Sleep was elusive for Marcus, who huddled in a corner, listening to the storm lash against the metal walls. Occasionally, Zara would stretch, scanning outside through a gap in the sliding door, her eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. With each rumble of thunder, Marcus found his thoughts drifting to the contract that bound them, and to the lethal corporation that seemed hell-bent on capturing them. He had barely managed to keep his job for half a decade, only to lose it in a single phone call. Now he was embroiled in something that felt far beyond any earthly conflict. Eventually, the train began to slow, squealing in protest as it rumbled toward a dimly lit siding. Zara motioned for silence, pressing a finger to her lips. Outside, they could see a couple of railroad workers wearing reflective vests, though no sign of armed mercenaries. We should jump off here, she whispered, and proceed on foot. The tower is only a few miles from this station. Marcus eyed the gloom outside and nodded. They slipped onto the track bed with as little noise as possible. The driving rain had tapered off to a relentless drizzle. Each breath Marcus took was laced with the smell of wet gravel and diesel fumes. Still, it was an improvement from the frantic flight in the city. Holding his phone up, he tried again to power it on. The screen remained blank. It's fried. That EMP, or maybe your energy jolt. Either way, it's not coming back, he muttered. Good. Less chance they can track us, Zara said, wiping raindrops from her brow. As they navigated away from the tracks, her suit emitted a faint glow, offering just enough illumination without making them an easy target. He realized her armor had a certain fluidity. When battle loomed, it took on a more fortified shape, but now it was lighter, emphasizing mobility. Every so often, that strange geometric pattern flickered over her shoulders and arms. They pressed uphill through a forest that loomed thick and dark, branches dripping with residual rainfall. The slope grew steeper, turning into loose rocks and muddy ravines. Marcus had to concentrate on placing his boots carefully to avoid slipping. Despite how physically fit he was, or used to be before stress and late work nights, he found himself gasping for breath. Zara, however, moved with tireless ease, occasionally offering her hand to help him across precarious sections. When the trees finally gave way to a narrow mountain road, Marcus caught sight of what he initially thought was a decaying observatory dome. But the structure was more angular, ringed by an old satellite dish array. The silhouette stood stark against the overcast sky. A faint blinking light at its peak suggested minimal power still ran through it. That's the place, Zara said, a relic from when local authorities tried to build a global communications hub. Funding vanished, and it was decommissioned. The perfect hideaway for a while. Marcus nodded, resisting the urge to ask 1,000 questions. How had Zara known of this location? Did she prowl the Earth, collecting secret lairs? But he pushed the curiosity down, focusing on the immediate goal. Get inside without being detected. Stay alive long enough to plan the next step. Under Zara's guidance, they skirted the perimeter fence, bypassing a defunct security gate. The interior courtyard was littered with debris, weathered shipping crates, twisted metal rods, and a shattered forklift. A battered sign labeled Crestview Communications Project lay in a puddle of stagnant rainwater. With a small burst of her energy, Zara short-circuited the building's front lock. They slipped inside, greeted by a stale, musty smell and flickering emergency lights. They found themselves in a wide hallway lined with dusty offices, each with smashed or missing computer terminals. The beep of a near-dead emergency battery echoed in the distance. Zara led Marcus to a stairwell that spiraled upward toward the main hub. The climb was long and tension weighed on them both, but it was a relief to be out of the open. At the top, the hallway opened into a cavernous chamber with a high, curved ceiling. A tangle of wires and half-assembled technology cluttered one side, while makeshift cots and shelves of canned goods occupied the other. Marcus's eyes widened. Someone was living here. A colleague of mine, Zara said, a tinge of sadness creeping into her voice. His name was Adron. He tried to become a contract bearer, but his body rejected the bond. He nearly died. In the end, he left Earth and ventured off-world, searching for a cure to the bond's rejection. This was where he stored his research. Marcus's gaze traced the disorganized piles of notes and archaic computer hardware. This all looks decades old. Did you know him well? Zara's expression darkened with old memories. We traveled together for a short time. He was brilliant, but he lacked the right moral grounding, I suppose. The contract isn't just about raw intelligence or physical prowess. It demands a certain alignment of spirit. Adrian had ambition, but not enough empathy. Or maybe it was the other way around. Either way, the bond refused him. She walked to a table bearing dusty mechanical parts. The reason I mention this is so you'll understand. I've been searching for a compatible bearer for a while. The criteria are more complicated than your earthly job applications. She offered a small, wry smile. When you signed that digital contract, it was the culmination of hidden threads weaving together. You were flagged by the artifact, identified as a likely candidate. I only responded when the contract was formalized. Marcus sank onto a metal stool, mind reeling. So this was all set in motion long before I lost my job, right? Maybe that was coincidence, or maybe it was orchestrated. Zara sighed, returning her focus to rummaging through a battered crate. She extracted a small generator module with odd, glowing inscriptions. Coincidence or not, we're here now, and Zoran Corp won't stop. They have unlimited resources, and they believe you're holding a piece of advanced technology that's rightfully theirs. They won't rest until they've either forced you to yield it or destroyed you for refusing. Marcus nodded grimly. He couldn't shake the feeling of being a pawn in a cosmic game, but every so often he'd feel the flutter of connection, the bond humming in his chest. Perhaps it meant he wasn't merely a pawn after all. Zara began tinkering with the generator module she'd retrieved, hooking it up to a nest of cables and battered computers. The entire time, a low hum of tension spanned the distance between her and Marcus, neither fully knowing what to say. Finally, she broke the silence. We'll need to plan our next steps carefully. Zoran's infiltration teams move fast, and once they realize we're not in the city, they'll likely scan for anomalies in the surrounding areas. We're probably safe until dawn, but not much longer. Marcus wiped grime from a control panel and studied the disjointed readouts. One small screen flickered with static, occasionally showing the outline of topographic maps. So, about this contract bond, you said it unlocks certain abilities in me. Earlier, I noticed that when I focused on a mental image, like an electrical circuit, your powers seemed to intensify. Is that normal? Normal enough, Zara answered, a faint smile on her lips. Your emotions fuel my core strength, but your intellect and intentions shape it. The bond merges logic with cosmic energy, in a sense. Many past guardians have had to coax that synergy from their hosts, but you seem to tap into it naturally. It's probably linked to your knack for engineering. Marcus chewed on this information. It was both terrifying and thrilling to realize he might hold some measure of control over supernatural forces. But is there a limit? If I get upset, do you go berserk? She pressed her lips together in thought. Intense emotions can spike the energy output, yes, but it's more nuanced than that. Rage or despair without focus can leave us vulnerable. The idea is to harness emotion with clarity, which is why your specialized way of thinking is so potent. You can direct the energy like an engineer designing a circuit. He let out a low whistle. That's a lot to take in. Before the conversation could continue, a jarring static blast came from one of the old speakers mounted on the wall. Marcus jumped, nearly toppling a stack of dusty manuals. Zara darted to the speaker, pressing a button. Through the crackling interference, a mechanical voice repeated, "Attention to all local law enforcement and contracted agencies. A large-scale search is authorized for a high-value asset, believed to be armed and extremely dangerous. All sightings must be reported immediately." "That's them," Zara muttered. Zoran likely bribed local enforcers to operate as their extended eyes and ears. She switched off the speaker with a snap. Marcus's gut twisted. "So my face is probably on a wanted list now. Great." Zara's expression was sympathetic. "We don't have the luxury to wait this out. Eventually they'll come in force. We need to either strike first or slip off-world." "Off-world," Marcus repeated, his voice shaky. He'd just begun to accept an alien presence on Earth. The idea of leaving the planet altogether stunned him. Yet the logic was sound. If Zoran had Earth's resources locked down, maybe the only way was up. "You have a ship hidden somewhere?" "Not exactly, but I do have a few possibilities," she said cryptically. "It won't be easy. Zoran has eyes everywhere, especially around any known cosmic gate." Whatever a cosmic gate was, Marcus suspected it would be the least normal experience of his entire life. An hour later, the tower's interior was bathed in the warm glow of portable lamps running off Zara's newly activated generator. The presence of light offered a semblance of normalcy, though the swirling storm clouds outside remained ominous, occasionally rumbling in the distance. Marcus busied himself by examining Adron's old research notes stacked in precarious piles. He found sketches of alien runes, references to galactic sovereign codes, and cryptic hints about the true nature of the contract. Many pages looked like half-finished equations and diagrams for advanced technological devices. Zara stood across the table from him, scanning a digital panel with narrowed eyes. "This place might still have a working transmitter. I'm trying to see if I can hijack a low-frequency channel to monitor Zoran's communications. If we're lucky, they won't have blocked every single band." Marcus closed the notebook in front of him and lifted his gaze. "Earlier, back in the city, you mentioned something about your heritage? That you come from a civilization that discovered these guardians. Are there more like you?" Her shoulders tensed slightly. "Yes, but many are scattered or in stasis. A few are bound to unsavory hosts across different star systems. Our culture collapsed in a civil war centuries ago, and the contract technology was sealed away. Zoran likely discovered a fragment of that technology and has been trying to replicate it ever since." He took a moment to absorb that. "So you're effectively the last active guardian of your kind, still free?" "That's right," she replied quietly, an undercurrent of sadness in her voice. "I was awakened for a mission, to seek a bearer who could protect the knowledge locked within me. That knowledge, ironically, is what Zoran wants to dissect and weaponize." A pang of empathy rose in Marcus. "So if I fail, you fall into their hands. They'll tear you apart to get what they want." She gave him a solemn nod. "I'd rather die than be their instrument. But the contract complicates that, since my well-being is tied to yours. If you die, I revert to a dormant state. They'd still salvage data from my remains. A horrifying scenario." Their conversation was cut short by a sudden beep from the panel. Zara's face lit up with grim satisfaction as she found a frequency that carried a faint audio feed. They listened. "Still no confirmed sightings. Teams have begun sweeping the highways and suburban outskirts. Project Hound is being deployed. Drone units will scan from above. Base, do we have clearance for aerial sweeps over the mountains?" A static-laced reply came through. "Affirmative. The CFO wants them found. No mistakes." Marcus swallowed hard. Drones. That means they'll spun our generator soon enough. Zara nodded, switching off the panel to keep their own transmissions hidden. We have to disrupt their scan or leave immediately. Remaining here much longer is suicide. Marcus rubbed his temples, exhaustion gnawing at him. All right, so what's the plan? We can't stand toe-to-toe with an army. Her gold irises glimmered. We leverage your gift for electronics and the contract's synergy. I have an idea, but it's risky. We lure them into a trap, sabotage their aerial scans, then slip away. The plan took shape over the next hour, though every detail was fraught with uncertainty. Marcus rummaged through Adron's stash of old communication relays and assembled them into a jerry-rigged broadcast tower on the building's roof. Meanwhile, Zara gathered a set of small, luminous crystals from a locked metal trunk. She explained they were arc shards, capable of enhancing or focusing the bond's energy under specific conditions. Typically, they would be used only by advanced guardians, but the situation left them no choice. Shortly before dawn, the sky began to lighten from pitch black to a hazy cobalt. Marcus felt the weight of fatigue in every muscle, yet adrenaline kept him moving. According to the borrowed radio frequency, Zoran's drones were patrolling the forested foothills at the base of the mountain. They'd likely converge on the tower within the hour. Out on the roof, the wind howled, and the battered satellite dishes groaned as they shifted in the gusts. Marcus knelt beside the improvised transmitter, hooking up final wires. The device was meant to emit a localized electromagnetic distortion that would temporarily blind high-tech sensors. But it needed an extra power source, something beyond what conventional batteries could provide. That's where the arc shards and Zara's bond came into play. The plan was to channel Marcus's engineering focus into Zara's cosmic energies, then surge it through the transmitter in one massive pulse. It's going to paint a big target on us, Marcus said, his voice muffled by the wind. But it might knock out their drones for several precious minutes, enough for us to vanish. Zara nodded. We'll slip into the tree line, make our way to a hidden path that leads deeper into the mountains. After that, we can figure out an off-world route or another safe location. He braced himself, peering down at his contraption. This idea, while ambitious, might fail catastrophically, frying their own equipment and leaving them helpless. But the alternative was to wait for Zoran's assault squads to swarm the tower. Clenching his teeth, he flipped a switch. The transmitter hummed to life, crackling with arcs of energy dancing between the copper coils. Zara stepped forward, pressing an arc shard against one coil. Her bodysuit glowed, and a wave of violet light pulsed out around them. Marcus felt that rush of warmth again, that sense of the bond stirring in his chest. His engineer's mind envisioned the energy flow, systematically guiding it into the transmitter's circuitry. The swirl of cosmic power responded, swirling around them in luminous tendrils. At that exact moment, a high-pitched whir from overhead made Marcus look up. Through ragged clouds, he caught the outline of a Zoran drone, a sleek, winged device scanning the tower with a bright red sensor. "Do it!" Zara said urgently. "They've found us!" Marcus focused with all his might on controlling the flux, flicking the final switch. The transmitter erupted in a flash of purple-white brilliance. The drone's sensors fizzled, its guiding lights winking out. Then a chain reaction sparked across the horizon as, presumably, every other drone within range suffered a similar fate, their circuits overloading in a halo of electromagnetic disruption. "Now!" Zara commanded, grabbing Marcus's hand. They dashed back through the tower corridors and down several flights of stairs, the pulse of residual energy still thrumming in the air. Marcus's skin tingled, and the hair on his arms stood on end. Already he heard approaching aircraft in the distance, helicopters perhaps, or advanced tilt-rotor vehicles, likely carrying Zoran's strike teams. They burst out a side exit, emerging into the pale morning light. Sparse fir trees dotted the mountainside, fading into denser forest beyond. Zara pointed to a narrow gravel pathway cutting downhill. "That's the route. Once we're behind the next ridge, they'll have to search manually. It'll buy us time." Marcus's lungs burned as they scrambled over slippery rocks. He risked a glance back at the tower. A swirling cloud of dust partially obscured it, but shapes were moving around the perimeter. The men in black combat suits had arrived, canning the building, presumably furious to find the drones neutralized. A pang of relief swept through him. They had succeeded in blinding Zoran's eyes, at least temporarily. Yet the sense of reprieve was short-lived. An alarm-like wail echoed through the valley, followed by distant shouts. Marcus felt an unsettling shift in the atmosphere, as though the mountaintop itself trembled with unseen power. Zara's face grew tense. "Something else is coming," she said, voice hollow. "They're not just sending foot soldiers this time." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, swallowing hard. She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "Zoran might have harnessed some black market alien tech. We have relics from my world that can disrupt or twist the contract's energies. Adrian once mentioned a device known as a shader coil, capable of fracturing the bond if used at close range. If they've got that—" She trailed off, not needing to finish the sentence. They picked up their pace, the path winding among tall pines and jagged boulders. The air smelled of damp earth and resin. Eventually, the trail led them to a small clearing with a rocky cliff face looming overhead. "We can hide here," Zara suggested, pointing to a natural alcove behind some ferns. "Regroup, plan our next step." Crouched among the ferns, they tried to steady their breathing. Marcus realized he was soaked to the bone, freezing in the mountain chill. Zara, sensing his discomfort, generated a faint, comforting aura of warmth around them. The gesture felt oddly intimate. He glimpsed her face, noticing the lines of fatigue etched there. Despite her incredible abilities, she too had limits. Then a reverberation cut through the clearing, like the hum of giant machinery powering up. Blue-tinged sparks crackled in the sky, forming a ring of swirling energy above the tower's spire. The sight made Zara go rigid with alarm. "That's definitely not Earth technology," she whispered. "They're opening some kind of gateway or channel." Marcus's heart plummeted. "Are they bringing reinforcements from another world? Possibly, or something worse." Her gaze flicked to Marcus, a swirl of sorrow and determination there. "We can't let them do this, not if we want to remain free. They'll tear the region apart." "Wait, you're suggesting we go back?" Zara turned toward the distant tower, jaw clenched. "Either we run for the rest of our lives or we take a stand right now." Nerves raw with exhaustion, Marcus realized that leaving the tower in Zoran's possession could trigger a catastrophe. If they had discovered a way to forcibly open dimensional gates, Earth might soon be flooded with other hostile forces or warp technologies. And if they had a shader coil or something like it, the contract bond could be assaulted directly, crippling Zara. Yet the thought of returning to fight an entire corporate army bristling with advanced weapons made his stomach lurch. Zara placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I know it seems insane, but sometimes the best defense is offense. I'll shield you as much as I can. Your role will be to disrupt any device they use to manipulate the bond. You do that, I can focus on neutralizing their forces." Marcus laughed, though there was no humor in it. Just another day in the life of an unemployed engineer, right? He inhaled sharply and rose to his feet. The swirling energies at the tower grew brighter, accompanied by flickers of inhuman silhouettes, possibly illusions or glimpses of something on the other side. "We have to do this now, or not at all." Zara nodded. The bond between them thrummed with resolute intensity, as if encouraging unity. They ascended the path, carefully retracing their steps toward the tower. The sun was rising fully now, illuminating the ridge in pale gold. Smoke drifted around the communications complex, accompanied by beams of searchlights. The unearthly shimmer at the top of the structure was more pronounced. A breach in reality, swirling purple and blue, anchored to some monstrous machinery Zoran must have assembled overnight. Crouching behind a cluster of boulders, they surveyed the scene. Zoran operatives lined the perimeter, carrying advanced rifles and scanning for movement. At the center of the courtyard near a half-collapsed antenna, a group of technicians hurried around a bulky apparatus. At first, Marcus thought it was some kind of generator, but then he noticed the unnatural fractal patterns etched along the device's metallic surface. The swirling glow akin to Zara's energy. A wave of dread washed over him. It was definitely alien hardware, possibly the rumored shader coil or a variant. If they activated it, it might unravel the bond. Marcus slid Zara a questioning look. "How do we get close enough to sabotage that thing without getting riddled with bullets?" A wry grin touched her lips. "We use the advantage they think they already have. They're expecting us to run, not come back to them." She nodded at the swirling gate overhead. Zoran's attention is on bridging that portal. We disrupt it at the right moment. They'll have bigger problems than chasing us. He swallowed. And by disrupt, you mean cause a meltdown, right? Her voice turned steely. Yes, Zoran's portal technology will collapse in on itself if we tamper with the control frequency. A meltdown will be messy, but it'll tear apart the apparatus, and hopefully the shader coil, if that's what they're powering. We just have to ensure we were not caught in the fallout. Marcus's heart thudded, but a firm resolve blossomed within him. One hand gently touched the pocket where he kept his father's old watch, his only keepsake from better days. This was insane, but letting Earth fall prey to corporate ambition twisted with alien malice was far worse. Glancing at Zara, he felt an odd sense of calm. Okay, let's do it. On my signal, then, Zara whispered, standing. Her armor glowed brighter, forging a protective shell around her. Marcus steadied his breathing, his mind already running through the steps to sabotage the alien device. In the hush of dawn, they prepared to wage a final stand in the place they had just fled, only now they would come ready to end this once and for all. They advanced in short bursts, weaving through toppled fences and using the terrain as cover. The buzz of advanced machinery hung in the humid morning air. Zara paused, scanning their surroundings for potential blind spots. We'll need a quick opening, something that draws most of them away from that apparatus, she whispered. Once we disrupt it, the entire portal structure collapses. But if they see us coming too soon, we won't get within 100 feet. Marcus nodded, pressing himself against the broken remains of a power console. Oh. He recalled the EMP device they'd built earlier in the workshop. They didn't have the equipment to recreate it fully here, but maybe they could rig a smaller-scale distraction. Pursing his lips, he turned to Zara. If we can cause a chain reaction in one of those leftover gas canisters, like we used for the tower's generator last night, it might scare them into pulling back for a moment. That might buy us enough time to run for the portal controls. Zara glanced around. Indeed, scattered about the courtyard were some heavy-duty cylinders that once powered the dish array. We'll have to do it quickly, she replied. Zoran's people won't be fooled for long, and we can't be too close when they blow. Marcus's gut twisted. No argument there. I'll set up a timed spark with some wires from that old forklift. While I do that, can you hold off any roving patrols? A slight grin crossed her cobalt blue lips. You managed to keep surprising me, Marcus Fowler. Set your trap. I'll handle the rest. They parted ways. Marcus crept along the scattered debris, all too aware of each metallic clank echoing in the open. He found a forklift on its side near the tower's outer wall. Its battery was battered, but a few cables were salvageable. Despite trembling hands, he managed to wire them into a makeshift spark fuse. Carefully, he dragged 2 gas canisters behind a chunk of broken concrete, placing them in line of sight of at least a dozen Zoran grunts. One false move, and he'd blow himself to bits. Yet he had no choice. Meanwhile, Zara prowled the edge of the courtyard, systematically taking down lone guards. She moved like living shadow, disabling each target with clinical efficiency. Any shouts of alarm were muffled by her preemptive strikes. Marcus couldn't see every detail, but he felt echoes through the bond. A pulse of adrenaline, a surge of determination, an occasional flicker of concern whenever a guard nearly spotted her. He realized that her danger sense and his technical focus were in constant interplay. Whenever he felt anxious about his jury-rigged bomb, the sense of Zara's presence steadied him, letting him proceed. At last, he set the timer, a simple mechanical contraption rigged to a watch spring. He scrambled away, throwing himself behind a reinforced pile of rubble. Hard hammering, he counted. 3, 2, 1. A bright spark flashed, igniting the gas. Flames roared skyward, followed by a concussive boom that shook the ground. Guards shouted in panic, scurrying for cover, and the technicians near the apparatus abandoned their posts momentarily. Marcus seized the chance, giving Zara a quick mental nudge through the bond. Zara moved first, leaping over a toppled satellite dish in a swirl of energy. Her bodysuit glowed with a fierce brilliance, deflecting stray bullets as alarmed Zoran soldiers fired sporadically in their confusion. She punched through a line of crates, clearing a path for Marcus. He emerged from behind the rubble, sprinting with all his might toward the central apparatus. Sparks from the flaming gas canisters still danced in the air, mingling with acrid smoke. The portal above them flickered ominously, momentarily destabilized by the shockwave. Over the throbbing roar of destruction, Marcus could hear Zoran's lead technician shouting, "Stay on it! The breach is incomplete, but we need more stabilization." Another voice barked, "Where the hell is that coil? We need it powered up now!" Marcus skidded to a halt at the base of the bulky alien device. Up close, it was more imposing, with twisted metal spines and swirling glyphs etched in a pattern that hurt his eyes if he stared too long. He quickly located what looked like a control panel, though it was more akin to a spiraling cluster of crystalline nodules. The design reminded him of Zera's arc shards, but scaled up. This had to be part of the shader coil, or the key power array for the portal. Either way, he had to sabotage it fast. Fumbling in his pocket, he yanked out a small multi-tool and a spool of wire. "Focus, Marcus," he told himself, forcibly calming the swirl of dread in his gut. He pictured a circuit in his mind's eye, mapping the likely flow of energy through those crystalline conductors. Slowly, he pressed a wire into one nodule, feeling a sudden charge travel up his arm. The bond flared to life, resonating in his chest. He sensed the device's power, intangible but present, like a complex data stream just beyond comprehension. Behind him, Zera engaged a fresh wave of mercenaries. He heard the clash of armor and bullets pinging off barriers she conjured. Shouting was everywhere. A single stray shot from a sniper could end him. But somehow Zera intercepted each threat. The synergy they shared in that moment was more profound than anything he'd experienced. Focusing again, he visualized the device's pathways, looking for a place to wedge in a feedback loop that would trigger an overload. Sweat trickled down his neck, but he jammed the spool's end into another crystal node, bridging two circuits that probably shouldn't interact. A tiny spark made him jerk his hand back. Come on," he muttered. With a final twist, he completed the sabotage. The entire apparatus vibrated, humming like a thundercloud about to break. A savage roar tore through the air, and Marcus spun to see an imposing figure stepping out from behind a collapsed pillar, a woman in a sleek black coat, holding a menacing pistol. Her platinum blonde hair was in a tight bun, and her voice was the very picture of corporate ruthlessness. "Very clever, Mr. Fowler," she called, leveling the pistol at him. "But you just destroyed our gateway. That won't go unpunished." Marcus recognized her from glimpses on news feeds. Director Destra, Zoran's rising star in advanced R&D. Destra's pale eyes gleamed with a mixture of fury and triumph. Behind her, half a dozen troopers converged, rifles drawn. Marcus felt his adrenaline spike. The apparatus next to him crackled, arcs of azure lightning licking up its spines. The sabotage was working, but that didn't solve the immediate predicament. A prime enforcer of Zoran's might had him at gunpoint. He swallowed, flicking his gaze around for a path of escape. None was obvious. Then, in a rush of motion, Zera vaulted over a chunk of twisted steel, slamming into two troopers and knocking them unconscious. Her armor shimmered dangerously as she landed near Destra. But the corporate director was ready. She pivoted, pressing a button on a small device strapped to her wrist. The air around Zera wavered like a heat mirage, and Zera gasped, stumbling. A wave of disorientation washed through the bond, making Marcus stagger as well. "That device," Zera hissed, her voice shaky. "It's a fractal emitter designed to scramble contract frequencies." She attempted to steady herself, but the normally smooth synergy of her movements faltered. "Master Marcus, my link. It's unraveling," Destra sneered, firing two shots that pinged off the remnants of Zera's flickering shield. "You Guardians think you're so special," she spat, "but a little stolen tech from your own civilization is enough to tame you." She nodded to her troopers. "Secure both of them." Marcus's mind raced. The fractal emitter must be interfering with the bond's energy exchange. Zera needed him to focus, to push back against that disruption. If he failed, Zera's powers would fail too, and they'd both be at Zoran's mercy. Summoning what courage he had left, he forced himself to block out the chaos of the firefight, to think like an engineer dealing with interference patterns. He pictured each wave of fractal disruption as a set of alternating signals. If he could visualize them and impose a new pattern, like setting two waves in opposite phase to cancel each other out, then maybe he could restore Zera's link. Within moments, he felt a faint stirring in the bond, as though part of him was reconnecting. Then Zara's gaze snapped to him, and he knew she felt it too. Destra was too busy gloating to notice the subtle shift. She stepped closer to Zara, gun raised. "You'll be quite valuable once we disassemble you," she remarked coldly. "All that genetic data locked in your cosmic signature. A pity I can't say the same for your pet engineer." Marcus clenched his fist. "Don't call me a pet." Then, harnessing every ounce of the renewed bond, he unleashed a mental push. Zara roared, her strength flaring back into full intensity. The fractal distortions around her shattered like glass. Destra's eyes widened in shock as Zara moved in a flash, disarming her with a single, elegant strike. The pistol clattered to the ground. Before Destra could activate another failsafe, Zara swept her leg out, knocking the director flat. A savage bolt of alien power coursed along Zara's arm, poised to strike. Marcus found himself shouting, "Zara, wait!" Time felt frozen, each second elongated by tension. Marcus stared at Zara's upraised hand. If she unleashed that energy bolt into Destra, it would almost certainly be fatal. The arcs dancing around Zara's fingertips seemed far from benign, charged with lethal promise. But the part of him that had grown to know Zara, despite their short, intense time together, knew she wasn't a cold-blooded killer. And yet, Destra had threatened them, threatened countless lives with her corporate warmongering and alien exploitation. Zara trembled with pent-up fury, eyes aglow. "She'd kill us both without a second thought," she spat, voice quivering. "If we let her go, she'll regroup, come after us again, possibly cause the entire planet more harm." Destra lay pinned under Zara's foot, glaring defiantly. Blood trickled from a cut on her temple. "You can't stop what's coming," she hissed. "Zoran Corporation is bigger than any two individuals, mortal or alien." Marcus's heart hammered, but he reached out and gently touched Zara's shoulder. "Don't become like them," he whispered urgently. "I know she's dangerous, but this isn't who you are." He felt Zara's conflict through the bond, a storm of rage, desperation, and the lingering hope that there was a better way. Slowly, the crackling energy in her hand diminished, receding into her armor. She exhaled, stepping back from Destra. "You deserve justice," Zara said quietly, "but I won't stain my conscience with your execution." Marcus bent down, retrieving Destra's weapon and tossing it far out of reach. He locked eyes with the director, feeling a grim sense of finality. "We're shutting this operation down." He gestured to the swirling device behind them. "That meltdown is imminent. You and your people have maybe 1 minute to clear out before it blows." Destra barked a hollow laugh. "You're insane. That meltdown could destroy half this mountain. Do you think you'll survive it?" Marcus didn't answer, primarily because he wasn't sure. Instead, he glanced at Zara. Through the bond, he felt her confidence, her plan to contain the worst of the energy if necessary. Destra spat on the ground and signaled her troopers to retreat. "This isn't over," she warned, staggering to her feet. "Zoran Corporation will bury you both." With that, she and the remaining soldiers dashed away, presumably heading to whatever vehicles or exits they had at the perimeter. The swirling portal overhead crackled with greater intensity, arcs of lightning spiderwebbing across the sky. The sabotage had turned the apparatus unstable, and the meltdown was mere seconds away. Zara held Marcus's gaze. "Are you ready for this?" He wasn't, not really, but he nodded anyway. "Let's get out of here." They sprinted from the apparatus, weaving through the courtyard as chunks of alien metal began ripping themselves apart in arcs of luminescent fury. The tower's structure groaned as dimensional rifts started to expand and collapse all at once. Over the din, Zara shouted, "Keep going! Don't look back!" But it was impossible not to look back, if only for a moment. The entire device glowed brilliant white, then erupted in a silent explosion that turned into a deafening roar. The shockwave hurled Marcus off his feet, and he felt Zara's arms wrap around him, the bond flaring to shield them both. Everything went blank for an instant, light too bright to register, sound too loud to hear. Then a weightless sensation, like being caught in a wave. When Marcus's vision returned, he was on the ground, coughing in a thick haze of dust. His ears rang painfully. Nearby, shards of twisted metal and swirling cosmic energy drifted in midair, slowly crumbling into glowing embers. The entire top portion of the tower had collapsed into a crater, the once imposing dome replaced by a ragged silhouette against the sky. Groaning, Marcus pushed himself to a kneeling position. "Zara," he croaked, blinking rapidly. The dust stung his eyes and the stench of ozone clung to everything. A figure emerged from the swirling haze. Zara stood with one arm clutched over her ribs, her armor scorched in places. Her expression was one of weary triumph. She staggered but remained upright, drawing closer to Marcus. "We did it," she murmured. "The portal is closed. The coil is gone. Zoran's entire operation here is finished." He managed a shaky grin. "They'll have other bases, other weapons, right? But for now, at least, we're free." A swirl of relief and exhaustion cascaded through their shared bond, intensifying as Zara helped him to his feet. She took stock of the devastation around them. They can't replicate that device easily. They'll regroup, but they'll be severely set back. And we're alive. Marcus suppressed the urge to laugh hysterically. "We should probably get off this mountain before Zoran calls in airstrikes or something equally horrifying." She nodded. Together they limped past the smoldering wreckage, down the slope where the pine trees stood battered but still upright. With each step, the morning sun rose higher, cutting through the settling dust. They reached a vantage point that offered a clear view of the tower's remains. Marcus paused, breathing heavily. He felt a mix of sorrow and victory. Sorrow for the destruction of a place that had briefly been their refuge. Victory in knowing they'd prevented something far worse. He turned to Zara. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for risking everything to protect me, to protect Earth." Her gold eyes shimmered in the fresh sunlight. "The contract binds me, yes, but you are the only bearer I've known who truly made me believe in something beyond just duty." She glanced away, almost shyly. "That synergy we shared, your mind guiding my power, was extraordinary. I've never felt anything like it." He squeezed her hand. "We'll figure out what it means. Zoran's not gone for good, but maybe we can stay a step ahead. Find a better way to share this bond." Nodding, she let out a breathy laugh. "In my culture, close bonds usually involve certain traditions. Some are more complicated than Earth's usual formalities, but we'll cross that bridge if we get to it." Marcus's grin widened, though it was laced with fatigue. "Traditions? You mean like your casual suggestions that we shower together for maximum efficiency? Because that might take some negotiation." Her laughter, melodious despite the tension, echoed against the broken tower. "Indeed, Master Marcus Fowler, indeed." They pressed on, leaving the scene of destruction behind, forging a new path down the mountain, together. In the weeks that followed, Marcus and Zara stayed on the move, taking back roads, abandoned motels, and occasionally stowing away on cargo transports to slip past Zoran's watchful eye. Though official news networks didn't mention the tower explosion in detail, the rumor mill on underground forums talked about a freak storm event that leveled a derelict facility. A few conspiracy sites speculated about alien interference. Zoran, for its part, seemed intent on controlling the narrative, painting Marcus as a dangerous saboteur. There were even forged images posted online, depicting him as some extremist who destroyed government property. But with every covert border they crossed, the bond between Marcus and Zara deepened. He grew more adept at channeling cosmic energy through engineering principles, occasionally using it to subvert security systems or jam Zoran's trackers. The synergy they shared felt like a living thing that grew stronger with every moment of trust. Zara taught him rudimentary combat illusions, how to project decoys, or shape a small barrier for personal defense. Conversely, Marcus introduced her to modern Earth gadgets and coding, which she found equally intriguing. Together, they formed an improbable partnership that was simultaneously exhilarating and comforting. During a cold, starlit night on the outskirts of a remote desert town, they found a moment of respite. Huddled around a makeshift campfire, they talked about everything from childhood memories to the cosmic wonders Zara had seen in her travels. She described her homeworld as a place once rich with knowledge, eventually torn apart by ideological rifts. "We developed the contract technology to preserve what was left of our civilization," she explained, eyes reflecting the crackling embers. But in the wrong hands, that technology becomes a weapon of domination. Marcus nodded solemnly. Zoran sees it as just another product to exploit. No wonder you fought so hard to keep it out of their control. She gazed at him, a tender warmth in her eyes. Thank you for standing by me. Few bearers would risk their lives for a cause they barely understand. Many in my culture considered us guardians to be nothing more than living tools once the bond formed. Her voice caught, revealing a lingering vulnerability. Marcus reached for her hand, their fingers interlocking. The bond thrummed quietly, a comforting presence. You're no tool, and if the contract has any real meaning, it's that we stand or fall together. Night closed in and they took turns resting. Marcus found himself lulled by the gentle hum of Zara's presence. The ghostly glow of the desert moon illuminated her silhouette, revealing an otherworldly beauty that made his heart ache with an inexplicable longing. Strange that their fates had become so entwined. By dawn, they'd resolved to reach a rumored black market transport facility on the coastline, where word had it starfarers occasionally made planetfall in hidden enclaves. Maybe that was their ticket off world, or maybe just a myth. But they had to try. Zoran's net would only tighten. And though Marcus had grown skilled at evading them, he knew the day would come when running wouldn't be enough. That day arrived much sooner than expected. Under the rose-colored twilight of a coastal morning, they approached a secluded cove rumored to host illicit starship traffic. Instead of a clandestine harbor, however, they found a massive black craft hovering over the shoreline, flanked by the distinctive logo of Zoran Corporation. Floodlights raked the rocky beach, glinting off the craft's hull, an advanced vessel that clearly wasn't standard Earth technology. It bore an eerie resemblance to Zara's own armor design, suggesting it had ties to the same ancient civilization. They hid behind a shelf of rocks, hearts pounding. Zoran's presence here couldn't be a coincidence. Marcus spotted armed guards patrolling the ramp leading into the vessel's belly. Overhead, the sky shimmered with faint distortions, perhaps a cloaking field or a partial gateway, hinting that this ship was preparing for an interstellar jump. Zara tensed, jaw set. If that ship leaves Earth with them, they might have everything they need to replicate the contract technology at scale. Who knows what horrors they'll unleash on unsuspecting star systems? Marcus glanced at her anxiously. You realize what you're suggesting, right? Another infiltration, possibly facing Destra or others from Goran's top brass. She nodded, eyes steely. We either let them enslave whole worlds or we take one last stand. If we get on board, it's only get on board we can sabotage the jump drive, keep them grounded. Exhaling, he felt the old swirl of dread and resolve. All right, one final infiltration. We do it together. They waited, watching the guard patterns, timing the sweeps of the floodlights. Their plan formed swiftly: approach from the far side of the cove, scale a service ladder on the ship's hull, and slip inside via a cargo bay door. Simple in theory, perilous in practice, but they had come too far to balk at danger now. Swiftly, they navigated the cove's uneven terrain. Zara used her latent energy to mask their presence, muting their footsteps and cloaking them in faint distortions. Marcus's heart pounded in his ears as they reached the looming vessel's flank. Every sense screamed that they were deep in enemy territory, yet the bond between them carried a kind of electric anticipation, fueling a synergy they had honed through each brush with death. They ascended the service ladder carefully, mindful of the squeaking rungs. At the top, Marcus fiddled with a control pad next to a sealed hatch, bypassing security protocols with a combination of cunning programming skills and a well-placed cosmic spark from Zara. The hatch slid open with a soft hiss. Hard hammering, they slipped into the ship. Inside, the corridors were unnervingly pristine, lit by strips of pale lavender luminescence that reminded Marcus of Zara's armor. He swallowed hard. This was the final stage of their race against Zoran. If they could sabotage the jump drive, Earth and countless other worlds might be spared. If they failed, he shuddered at the thought. Zara squeezed his hand, and he found comfort in her unwavering resolve. We finish this, she whispered, voice echoing softly in the metallic passage. They pressed on, deeper into the alien craft, determined to preserve the freedom they'd fought so hard to grasp. When we look back on this story, From the fateful moment Marcus signed that uncanny contract to the final stand against corporate exploitation, it's clear that resilience and compassion carried the day. Through near impossible odds, our unlikely duo chose collaboration over fear. Marcus's engineering genius and Zero's unwavering courage forged a connection that outlasted any betrayal or technological threat. In the end, what began as an accidental signature became a testament to the power of trust and open-hearted partnership. Even in a universe of looming portals and secret agendas, the best victories come from standing up for one another. Now, as they chart their course forward, whether on Earth or beyond, it's hope, not greed, that lights their path. We'd love to hear your thoughts and reactions. Comment below with any theories, favorite moments, or ideas you'd add. Your feedback keeps our community vibrant, and your voice might spark the next chapter of imaginative adventures.